The vampire king's hand shot out and caught the stone mid-air, inches from the sobbing child's face, then crushed it to powder between his pale fingers, while the entire village square fell into a silence so absolute that even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Wait, before the next revelation happens. If this mystery has already captivated you, let us know where you're following this story from. To make sure you don't miss any unexpected alliances or awakened powers, subscribe and join our circle. The game is about to change. Now, back to the scene. The boy, no more than 7 years old, stood frozen in the shadow of Lord Lucian Morthenhain, his twisted left leg trembling beneath him as tears carved clean paths through the dirt on his cheeks. The crowd of villagers who had been mocking him moments before now pressed backward against the market stalls, their faces draining of color. Who threw this? Lucian's voice was quiet, almost conversational, but it carried across the square like the hiss of a blade being drawn. No one answered. The autumn afternoon had been raucous with commerce and cruelty just seconds ago, vendors hawking their wares, children playing, and a group of older boys circling this limping child like wolves, their jeers growing louder with each stone they threw. Now, the marketplace of Greyhollow might as well have been a tomb. Lucian Morthenhain had ruled these lands for 3 centuries, though most of the current villagers had only known him for the span of their brief mortal lives. He emerged from his fortress on the cliff above the village perhaps twice a year, always at twilight, always alone. His presence a reminder of the ancient pact that kept Greyhollow prosperous and protected, and the price that prosperity demanded. 3 young people of age each year would walk up the mountain path to his keep. Some called them tributes, others called them sacrifices. None ever returned. The vampire's eyes, the color of storm clouds threaded with silver, swept across the crowd. He stood well over 6 feet tall, his black coat falling to his knees, fastened with silver clasps shaped like thorns. His face was beautiful in the way that certain poisons are beautiful, pale and perfect and utterly inhuman, framed by hair as dark as a raven's wing that fell past his shoulders. "I asked a question," Lucian said, and this time his voice dropped even lower, which somehow made it more terrifying. "Who threw this?" A woman in the crowd pushed forward, the baker's wife, her flour-dusted apron still tied around her waist. "My lord, please, they're just children, boys playing. They meant no—" "They meant every stone," the vampire interrupted, his gaze never leaving the crowd. "Every word, every laugh." He looked down at the boy beside him, who had been trying to make himself smaller, as if he could disappear into the cobblestones. "What is your name, child?" The boy's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Tobias, my lord." Tobias. Lucian crouched down, bringing himself to eye level with the child, and several people in the crowd gasped. The Lord of the Mountain did not lower himself to anyone? Why were they laughing at you? Tobias's lower lip trembled. His left leg, withered and bent from birth, was wrapped in crude leather braces that squeaked when he moved. "Because I'm broken, my lord. Because I can't run like them, or work like them, or be useful like them." Fresh tears spilled down his face. "My own father says I'm a burden. The priest says I'm cursed. They all say I should have been left in the woods when I was born." The vampire's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those silver-threaded eyes, something old and cold, and very, very angry. He stood, and when he spoke again, his voice carried to every corner of the square, to every window where faces pressed against glass, to every doorway where people had frozen mid-step. "I see before me the good people of Greyhollow," Lucian announced. "Prosperous farmers, successful merchants, faithful churchgoers who pray every Sunday for salvation and mercy." He let the silence stretch. "And yet, I see a child, a helpless child, being driven to tears by stones and mockery in broad daylight, while you all stand by and watch. Some of you even smiled." A man in the crowd, thick-necked and red-faced, wearing a blacksmith's apron, stepped forward with foolish courage. "Begging your pardon, my lord, but the boy is cursed. It ain't natural, the way he's made. His mother must have sinned, or—" The vampire moved. One moment he was standing beside Tobias. The next he was inches from the blacksmith's face, though no one had seen him cross the intervening space. The man's bravado crumbled instantly. "Cursed," Lucian repeated softly. "Tell me, blacksmith, do you know what a curse actually is?" He didn't wait for an answer. "A curse is when someone who has done nothing wrong suffers because of the cruelty or stupidity of others. By that definition, this child is indeed cursed, cursed to live among you." The blacksmith stumbled backward, nearly falling over his own feet. Lucian turned his attention back to the crowd. "I am making a new rule, effective immediately. Anyone in Greyhollow who harms this child, with stones, with words, or with exclusion, will personally answer to me. And I promise you, my justice is far less merciful than whatever god you claim to worship." He let that sink in. "Furthermore, young Tobias will be coming with me." A collective gasp rippled through the square. Even Tobias looked up in shock, his tear-stained face going pale. "My lord," the priest rushed forward, his robes flapping, "surely you don't mean he's just a child, not of age for the tribute." Did I stutter, priest? Lucian's gaze could have frozen fire. "I am not taking him as tribute. I am taking him as my ward. He will live in my keep, under my protection, and he will be educated and trained as I see fit." He looked down at Tobias. "Unless you wish to stay here, child, I will not force you." Tobias looked at the crowd, at the faces that had never shown him kindness, at the boys who had thrown stones, at his own father who stood in the back and wouldn't meet his eyes. Then he looked up at the vampire lord who had defended him, this creature of nightmare and legend who had caught a stone meant for his face. "I'll go with you, my lord," Tobias said, his voice steadier than before. Then it's settled. Lucian placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, gently, carefully. "Collect whatever belongings you cannot bear to leave behind. We depart in 1 hour." As Tobias limped away toward the hovel he called home, Lucian addressed the crowd one final time. "The tribute this season will still be required. 3 souls of age, as always. But remember this day, people of Greyhollow. Remember that the monster on the mountain showed more humanity than any of you." He smiled then, showing just a hint of fang. "I wonder what that says about monsters." Then he was gone, vanished like smoke, leaving the villagers to contemplate their own reflections in that terrible mirror he'd held up. The path up the mountain was steep and winding, carved into the cliff face centuries ago. Tobias struggled with each step, his twisted leg aching, his meager bundle of belongings, a spare shirt, a wooden horse his mother had carved before she died, and a book of fables given to him by a traveling merchant who'd taken pity on him, clutched against his chest. But every time he faltered, Lucien was there, not rushing him, not complaining, simply present like a shadow that refused to abandon its source. "You don't have to pretend it doesn't hurt," the vampire said quietly as twilight deepened around them. "Pain acknowledged is pain that can be managed." "It always hurts," Tobias admitted. "I'm used to it." "That's the saddest thing I've heard in a century," Lucien replied. They reached the gates of Morthahane Keep just as the first stars emerged. The fortress was far larger than Tobias had imagined, built from black stone that seemed to absorb the moonlight. Gargoyles crouched on the parapets, their faces frozen in eternal screams or laughter. It was hard to tell which. Iron-bound doors opened at Lucien's approach, swinging inward without any visible servant pushing them. Inside, torches burst into flame along the walls, illuminating a grand entrance hall with vaulted ceilings and tapestries depicting battles long forgotten. But what caught Tobias's attention was the figure descending the curved staircase, a woman in a burgundy gown that trailed behind her like spilled wine, her auburn hair pinned up with silver combs, her eyes the same storm cloud color as Lucien's. "Brother," she said, her voice rich with amusement and surprise, "you've brought home a stray. Morgana, meet Tobias. He'll be staying with us." Lucien helped the boy set down his bundle. "Tobias, this is my sister, Lady Morgana Morthahane." Morgana glided closer, studying the boy with frank curiosity. Unlike her brother's controlled stillness, she moved with predatory grace, circling Tobias like she was assessing a puzzle. "A ward? How delightfully unexpected! We haven't had a child in the keep since—" She trailed off, glancing at her brother. "Since Victor," Lucien finished, and something passed between them, a shadow of old grief. "The boy is exhausted and hungry," Lucien continued. "Have rooms prepared, something on the eastern side with morning light, and tell Mrs. Blackwood we'll need proper meals suitable for a growing child." "Mrs. Blackwood?" Morgana raised an elegant eyebrow. "You mean our cook who hasn't prepared food that requires chewing in 50 years? She'll remember. She was human once." Lucien removed his coat, handing it to absolutely no one. It simply hung itself on a nearby hook. "I trust you can manage, sister." Morgana sighed dramatically but smiled. "Come along, little Tobias. Let's get you settled before you collapse. You look like a strong wind could knock you over." "That's because a strong wind could knock me over," Tobias said without thinking, then immediately clapped his hand over his mouth, terrified he'd been too bold. But Morgana laughed, a genuine, delighted sound. "Oh, he has spirit. I like him already. Perhaps this won't be boring after all." As Morgana led him deeper into the keep, Tobias glanced back to see Lucien standing in the entrance hall, silhouetted against the doorway, watching them go. For just a moment, the vampire lord looked unbearably lonely. The rooms Morgana brought him to were larger than the entire house Tobias had shared with his father and siblings. A 4-poster bed dominated the space, piled with quilts and furs. A fireplace crackled with fresh flames. Windows overlooked the valley, where Grey Hollow's lights twinkled like fallen stars. "Bath first," Morgana declared, pointing to an adjoining room where steam was already rising from a copper tub. "Don't argue, you smell like fear and poverty." "I am poor," Tobias said. "We're poor," she corrected. "Past tense. Whatever else you may be now, you're under the protection of House Morthahane. That comes with certain standards." Her expression softened slightly. The water will help your leg. There are salts in it, very old remedies. They won't fix what's wrong, but they'll ease the ache." She left him alone, and Tobias discovered she was right. The hot water worked into his muscles like magic, loosening knots of pain he'd carried for so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to be without them. He found clothes laid out when he emerged: soft trousers, a linen shirt, a velvet tunic in deep blue. Everything fit perfectly, as if made for him. Dinner was served in a smaller dining room. Not the grand hall he'd glimpsed, but an intimate space with a round table and comfortable chairs. Mrs. Blackwood, it turned out, was a plump woman with silver hair and kind eyes who fussed over Tobias like a hen with one chick. She brought him roasted chicken, fresh bread with butter, glazed carrots, apple tart, and fresh milk. Lucien sat across from him, a goblet of dark red liquid, definitely not wine, in his hand. He didn't eat, just watched Tobias with an expression that might have been satisfaction. "My lord," Tobias said between bites, because his father had taught him some manners, even if he'd taught him nothing else useful, "why did you really bring me here?" "Because you needed bringing," Lucien replied simply. "But I'm nobody. I'm useless. Everyone says." "Everyone is wrong." The vampire's voice carried absolute certainty. "You want to know what I see when I look at you, Tobias? I see a child who's endured years of cruelty and yet still has hope in his eyes. I see someone who's been broken by circumstances beyond his control and yet refuses to surrender. That's not weakness. That's strength most adults will never possess." Tobias felt his throat tighten. "They say I'm cursed." "Then we have something in common." Lucien took a sip from his goblet. "I've been cursed for 300 years. Cursed to watch mortals live and love and die while I remain unchanging. Cursed to need blood to survive. Cursed to be feared by the very people I protect." He set down the goblet. "But curses are just circumstances, Tobias. What matters is what you do with them. What will I do here? Learn, grow, become who you're meant to be." Lucien leaned forward slightly. "Your leg limits your body, not your mind. I've seen scholars and strategists accomplish more from chairs than warriors accomplish with swords. Tomorrow, we begin your education. You'll study history, mathematics, languages, philosophy. You'll learn about this land and its people. And if you're willing, I'll teach you other things. Things about the supernatural world, about creatures like me, about the ancient magic that still threads through these mountains." Tobias's eyes went wide. "Really?" "Really." Something almost like a smile crossed Lucien's face. "But first, you rest. You've had quite enough excitement for one day." As Mrs. Blackwood escorted him back to his rooms, Tobias felt something unfamiliar blooming in his chest. It took him until he was lying in the impossibly soft bed, staring at the ceiling painted with constellations, to recognize it. Hope. Actual hope. For the first time in his 7 years of life, he thought the future might hold something other than pain and mockery. The monster on the mountain had shown him more kindness in an afternoon than his own village had shown in a lifetime. Tobias fell asleep wondering if maybe monsters weren't the ones with fangs after all. 3 months passed like pages turning in a fascinating book. Tobias discovered that Lucien hadn't been exaggerating about his education. Each morning he met with various tutors, some human, some decidedly not, who taught him reading, writing, arithmetic, geography, and history. But the most remarkable lessons came from Lucien himself, usually in the vast library that took up an entire wing of the keep. The world is far older and stranger than what your village priest taught you, Lucian explained one evening, pulling leather-bound volumes from shelves that reached to the vaulted ceiling. Vampires are just one of many supernatural races. There are werewolves in the northern territories, fey courts in the deep forests, witches who can bend reality itself, hunters who've sworn to destroy us all, and ancient things sleeping beneath mountains that predate humanity itself. "And they're all real?" Tobias asked, perched in a chair with cushions to support his leg. "All real, all dangerous. All operating under complicated treaties and feuds that stretch back centuries." Lucian opened a book to a page with intricate illustrations. "This is a map of the supernatural territories in this region alone. See these boundaries? They're maintained by blood pacts, magical wards, and mutual destruction agreements. Peace is a very fragile thing, Tobias. Is that why you take tribute from the village?" The boy had been wondering about this for weeks. To maintain peace? Lucian's expression grew somber. "The truth is more complicated than you know. But yes, the tribute is part of an ancient pact, though not for the reasons your villagers believe." "What happens to them, the people who come up here?" "That," Lucian said quietly, "is not a story for tonight." Tobias learned not to push when Lucian closed a topic. The vampire was patient and generous with knowledge, but there were shadows in his past that he kept locked away like dangerous artifacts. Morgana provided a different kind of education. She taught Tobias how to navigate social situations, how to read people's intentions, how to turn sharp observation into strategic advantage. "You'll never be the strongest person in the room," she told him frankly one afternoon while they played chess in the conservatory. "Your leg ensures that. But you can be the smartest, the most observant, the one who sees the patterns others miss." She moved her bishop. Check. Tobias studied the board, then moved his knight. Checkmate in 3 moves. Morgana blinked, looking at the board, then smiled with genuine approval. "I didn't see that. Well done." "You taught me to look for what people overlook," Tobias said. "You were so focused on your bishop's attack that you didn't notice my knight's position." "Clever boy." She reset the pieces. Again. They also taught him about vampire nature, carefully, gradually, ensuring he was never frightened. He learned that Lucian and Morgana could walk in overcast daylight, though they preferred twilight and night. He learned they could eat human food, but gained no sustenance from it. He learned that their strength was immense, their speed impossible, their senses supernaturally acute. And he learned that they had been human once, centuries ago, before something terrible had changed them. "What was it like?" Tobias asked Lucian one night. "Becoming what you are?" They were in the observatory at the top of the keep's highest tower, looking at stars through a brass telescope. Lucian was quiet for so long that Tobias thought he wouldn't answer. "Like drowning," Lucian finally said. "Like dying and being reborn into something powerful and terrible. Like losing everything you were and discovering you're now something the world fears." He adjusted the telescope. "I was 28 when I was turned. Morgana was 25. We were nobility, believe it or not, a lord and lady of a great house. Then war came, and plague, and something far worse in their wake. What happened? We made a choice, a desperate, foolish, irrevocable choice to survive." Lucian's voice held centuries of regret. "We thought we were saving ourselves. We didn't realize we were trading our mortality for an eternity of isolation." "But you have each other," Tobias pointed out. "Yes." Lucian finally looked at him, and something in his expression softened. "And now we have you." The boy felt warmth spread through his chest. "Do you regret it, bringing me here?" Never. The word was absolute. You've reminded me of something I'd forgotten, Tobias. Purpose. These past 3 months, watching you learn and grow and start to believe in yourself, that's worth more than a century of existing in darkness. Winter came to the mountains, bringing snow that turned the landscape into something from a fable. Tobias's leg ached worse in the cold, but Mrs. Blackwood made poultices that helped, and Morgana enchanted his boots. She had some magic, it turned out, learned from a witch decades ago, to warm his feet and provide better support. He was reading in the library on the longest night of winter when he heard voices raised in argument from somewhere deeper in the keep. Curious, and perhaps a bit nosy, as Morgana had pointed out was one of his less endearing qualities, he followed the sound to a room he'd never entered before. The door was ajar. Through it, he could see Lucien and Morgana standing before a large map spread across a table. "Getting worse," Morgana was saying. "3 villages to the north have been attacked. Slaughter, Lucien. Complete slaughter. The blood-bound clan isn't honoring the territories anymore." "Victor has always been ambitious," Lucien replied, and Tobias remembered that name from his first night here. "But he's not stupid enough to start a war. Then he's gone mad. These attacks bear his signature, vicious, theatrical, designed to spread terror." Morgana traced a line on the map. "He's moving south, toward us. Let him come. Morthane Keep has stood for 3 centuries. It will stand against Victor." "What about Grey Hollow?" Morgana's voice rose. "If he attacks the village, then I will destroy him." Lucien's tone held finality. "Victor may be my brother by blood, but he stopped being my brother when he chose carnage over coexistence." Tobias must have made a sound, a gasp, a shuffle, because both vampires turned toward the door. Morgana moved in a blur and yanked it open fully, revealing the boy. "Eavesdropping?" She raised an eyebrow. "I didn't mean to," Tobias said quickly. "I heard arguing, and I was worried, and—" He looked at Lucien. "You have another brother?" Lucien exchanged a glance with Morgana, then sighed. "Come in, Tobias. I suppose it's time you knew the full truth." The room turned out to be a strategy chamber, walls lined with maps and charts tracking movements Tobias didn't understand. Lucien pulled out a chair for him. "Victor was my younger brother when we were human," Lucien began. "He was turned with us. The 3 of us transformed together, thinking we would face eternity as a family. But where Morgana and I tried to hold on to our humanity, to create rules and boundaries for ourselves, Victor embraced the monster. He feeds indiscriminately," Morgana continued, "kills for pleasure, creates armies of newborn vampires without teaching them control, then unleashes them on human settlements. He's become everything that makes mortals fear our kind." "I thought I could contain him," Lucien said. "For decades, I've maintained the territorial boundaries, negotiated with other vampire lords, kept Victor restricted to the northern wastes. But if he's breaking those agreements—" He trailed off, jaw tight. "The tribute," Tobias said suddenly, pieces clicking together. "They're not sacrifices, are they? You're turning them." The silence that followed was answer enough. "Not against their will," Lucien said finally. "Everyone who walks up that path does so knowing what waits at the end. I offer them a choice: return home with gold enough to change their lives, or accept the transformation and join my household. Some choose gold, some choose immortality." "And they stay here, all of them?" "Most. Some eventually leave to make their way in the wider supernatural world, with my training and my protection." Lucien met his eyes. "I'm trying to create something different, Tobias. A house of vampires who choose honor over hunger, who remember what it means to be human even though we're not anymore." Victor thinks that's weakness, Morgana added. He's been trying to undermine Lucian for centuries, to prove that vampires should rule through fear and force. And now he's coming here to make his point, Tobias finished. We don't know that for certain, Lucian said, but his tone lacked conviction. A bell began tolling somewhere in the keep, deep, resonant, urgent. All three of them froze. The ward alarm, Morgana breathed. Lucian was moving before she finished speaking, Morgana right behind him. Tobias struggled to his feet, grabbing his cane, a beautiful thing carved from dark wood that Lucian had commissioned for him, and followed as quickly as his leg allowed. They emerged onto the battlements into chaos. The night sky was lit by unnatural red light, and in the valley below, Tobias could see Grey Hollow burning. "No," Lucian whispered, and the anguish in that single word was terrible to hear. No, he wouldn't dare. He would, and he has. A new voice, cold and mocking, came from the darkness. A figure materialized on the far end of the battlement, a man who could have been Lucian's twin, save for the cruel twist to his mouth and the scarlet color of his eyes. Victor. He was dressed in black leather, and his hands were stained with blood. "Hello, brother. Did you miss me?" "Victor!" Lucian's voice had gone deadly quiet. "What have you done?" "Made a statement," Victor smiled, showing fangs. "You've grown soft, Lucian, playing house with humans, honoring ancient pacts, pretending you're still one of them. It's pathetic. So I decided to remind you what we really are." He gestured toward the burning village. "Monsters, predators, kings of the night who bow to no one. You've killed them." Lucian took a step forward, and the air around him seemed to darken, crackling with barely contained rage. "Innocents. There are no innocents, only prey." Victor's gaze slid to Tobias, and his smile widened. "Oh, what's this? The crippled boy from the village? I heard you'd taken in a pet, but I had to see it to believe it. The mighty Lucian Mortathane, reduced to playing father to broken things. Leave the child out of this," Morgana warned, moving to stand between Victor and Tobias. "Why, he's part of the problem." Victor began walking toward them, each step deliberate. "You're trying to build some fantasy where humans and vampires coexist in harmony. But that's a lie, Lucian. We're predators, they're food. That's the natural order." "The only lie here is the one you tell yourself," Lucian shot back. "That being a monster is all we can be, that we have no choice." "We don't." Victor's composure cracked. "We're damned, brother, cursed. The humanity you cling to is a ghost, and the sooner you accept that—" "I'll never accept it." Lucian's voice rang with conviction. "And I'll never let you spread your poison in my lands." Victor laughed. "Your lands? I've just razed your precious village. I've killed dozens of the humans you swore to protect. And I did it to prove a point. You can't save them. You can't even save yourself. Then you've failed." Lucian moved in a blur, crossing the distance between them in an instant, his hand catching Victor by the throat and slamming him against the stone wall. "Because I'm not trying to save myself. I'm trying to save people like Tobias, people who deserve better than monsters like you." Victor struggled, but Lucian's grip was iron. "You think you're different? You think your noble intentions make you less of a killer? How many have you drained, brother? How many died to keep you and your precious household fed? None who didn't choose it. Lucian's eyes blazed silver. "I take only from volunteers, and I turn only those who beg for it. Every soul in my household is here by choice, Victor. Can you say the same?" "Choice," Victor spat. "You offer them choice and call it mercy. I offer them the truth of what we are. You offer them death." The two vampires stared at each other, centuries of conflict blazing between them. Then Morgana's voice cut through the tension. "Lucian, the village, we need to help them." Lucian glanced at his sister, then back at Victor. For a moment, Tobias thought he would tear his brother's head off right there. Instead, he threw Victor away, sending him skidding across the stones. "This isn't over," Lucian warned. Victor climbed to his feet, straightening his coat. "No, it's just beginning. I have an army, brother. 60 newborn vampires, all hungry, all eager to prove themselves. They're spreading through your territories even now. By dawn, your little kingdom will be ash. Then by dawn, I'll have sent them all to the hell you crawled out of." Lucian turned to Morgana. "Take Tobias to the safe room, then gather our house and meet me at the village. We end this tonight." "Lucian," Tobias started. "No arguments." Lucian's voice softened. "You're brave, child, but this is not your battle." "He's right about one thing," Tobias said, loud enough for Victor to hear. "You're not like him. You're nothing like him." He looked the vampire lord in the eyes. "And that's why you'll win." Something flickered in Lucian's expression. Surprise, gratitude, determination. He placed a hand on Tobias's head, just for a moment, in an almost paternal gesture. Then he was gone, vaulting over the battlements and dropping toward the valley, moving to save what remained of Greyhollow. Victor watched him go, then turned his scarlet gaze on Tobias. "Enjoy your hero while you can, crippled boy. He's fighting against his own nature, and nature always wins in the end." Then he too vanished into the night, leaving Tobias alone with Morgana on the battlements, watching the village burn. "Come," Morgana said gently, "we need to get you to safety." But Tobias was thinking. His mind, sharpened by 3 months of intensive education, was already working through angles and possibilities. Lucian had taught him history and strategy. Morgana had taught him to see patterns others missed. And between them, they'd given him something more valuable than either of those things. They'd given him hope. And people with hope did dangerous things. "I have an idea," Tobias said, "but you're not going to like it." Morgana looked at him sharply. "Tobias, Victor is here for Lucian. He wants to prove that vampires can't be good, that you're all just monsters." Tobias spoke quickly, his thoughts racing. "But what if we prove him wrong? Not with violence, but with what Lucian's actually built here." "I'm listening." "The tribute. The humans Lucian turned. They chose this, right? They chose to become vampires, and they chose to follow Lucian's way." Tobias gripped his cane. "That's an army too. An army of vampires who know there's a better path. If they stand with Lucian, if they fight to protect what he's built here, that proves Victor is wrong." Morgana stared at him. "You want to rally our household against an assault force of 60 newborn vampires? I want to show Victor that honor and choice are stronger than hunger and chaos." Tobias met her eyes. "Isn't that what you've been teaching me? That being smart matters more than being strong?" A slow smile spread across Morgana's face. "You brilliant, mad little human. It might actually work." She pulled out a curved horn from her belt, something ancient and carved with runes. "This is the household call. Every vampire sworn to House Morthahane will hear it and come." "Then blow it," Tobias said. "Call them to war, not for conquest, but for everything worth protecting." Morgana raised the horn to her lips and blew. The sound that emerged was like nothing Tobias had ever heard, a deep, resonant note that seemed to vibrate in his bones, that carried power and purpose and ancient authority. It echoed across the mountains, through the valleys, into every shadow where members of House Morthahane might be listening. And from the darkness they came. From the keep itself, from the surrounding forests, from patrol routes and hidden sanctuaries, vampires began to materialize. Men and women who had once been human, who had walked up the mountain path and chosen transformation, who had spent years or decades learning Lucien's way. They gathered in the courtyard below, dozens of them, all looking up at Morgana for orders. "Brothers and sisters of House Morthane," Morgana called down, her voice carrying to every corner of the keep. "Tonight, Victor Bloodbound has attacked Bray-Hollow. He's brought an army to prove that we're all monsters, that honor and choice are delusions. He wants to tear down everything Lord Lucien has built, everything we've worked to become." The vampires below shifted, their expressions hardening. "But we know better, don't we? We know that being a vampire doesn't mean surrendering our humanity. We know that strength without mercy is just tyranny, and power without purpose is just chaos." Morgana's eyes blazed silver. "Victor thinks numbers will win this war. He has 60 newborn vampires who know nothing but hunger. But we are House Morthane. We are disciplined. We are united. And we fight for something worth dying for. The right to choose who we are instead of accepting what we were made to be." A cheer went up from the assembled vampires. "Lord Lucien is in Greyhollow, protecting those who cannot protect themselves. We will join him. We will show Victor and his rabble what real vampires look like. Not mindless predators, but warriors with honor." Morgana raised her fist. "For Morthane, for the Lord of the Mountain, for the choice to be more than monsters." "For Morthane!" The response shook the very stones of the keep. Morgana turned to Tobias. "You're staying here." "No." The boy set his jaw stubbornly. "This was my idea. I'm seeing it through." "Tobias, you can't fight." "I don't need to fight. I need to be there." He gripped his cane tighter. "Victor called me a pet, a broken thing. If I hide while you all fight for what I inspired, then he's right. But if I stand with you, even if all I can do is stand, then I prove that even the weakest person has value." Morgana looked at him for a long moment, then sighed. "You're going to give me an eternity of gray hairs, aren't you?" "Probably. Fine. But you stay behind our lines, you follow my orders exactly, and if I tell you to run, you run. Understood?" "Understood." 20 minutes later, the army of House Morthahane descended the mountain path. Morgana carried Tobias. His leg couldn't have managed the speed, and he watched over her shoulder as the keep receded into the distance, its black stones stark against the stars. They reached Greyhollow to find it in chaos. Buildings burned, bodies littered the streets, and everywhere vampires fought vampires in a brutal, savage dance. Victor's newborns were easy to spot, wild, frenzied, fighting with pure instinct and hunger. House Morthahane's vampires moved with precision, trained discipline evident in every strike. At the center of it all, in the village square where he'd first defended Tobias months ago, Lucien fought Victor. It was like watching two storms collide. They moved too fast for human eyes to fully track, blurs of violence and power. Where they struck, cobblestones cracked. Where they grappled, the air itself seemed to scream. Both were covered in blood, their own and others, and neither showed any sign of stopping. "Shield formation," Morgana ordered, setting Tobias down behind an overturned cart. "Protect the boy and the surviving villagers. Everyone else, engage Victor's forces. Non-lethal if possible. These newborns don't know what they've become. But don't die trying to save someone who won't be saved. The vampires of House Morthethane moved as one, a coordinated force that quickly began overwhelming Victor's chaotic army. They fought with swords, with stakes, with their own supernatural strength, but always with control. Tobias watched as one of Lucien's vampires, a woman who'd been a seamstress before her turning, disarmed 3 newborns and bound them with silver chains rather than killing them. "Stand down," she shouted at them. "You've been lied to. There's another way." Some of the newborns hesitated. Some even stopped fighting, confused by vampires who offered mercy instead of destruction. But Victor noticed. Oh, he noticed. "Look at them, Lucien!" Victor roared, breaking away from his brother and gesturing at the scene. "Your precious house, fighting my newborns to a standstill. And for what? To save a village that would burn you at the stake if they had the chance? To save the idea that we can be better than our worst impulses," Lucien shot back, blood dripping from a gash across his face. "Something you've never understood." "And what about him?" Victor pointed directly at Tobias, his scarlet eyes locking onto the boy. "Your little pet? Your proof that humans and vampires can coexist?" He laughed bitterly. "Watch this, brother. Let me show you how your precious villagers really feel." Before anyone could stop him, Victor blurred across the battlefield, grabbed a man cowering in a doorway. Tobias recognized him with a jolt. It was his father, and dragged him into the open. "Tell them," Victor hissed, forcing the man to his knees. "Tell your lord how grateful you are for his protection. Tell him how much you appreciate him taking your useless son." Tobias's father, Garrett was his name, looked around wildly, his face pale with terror. His eyes found Tobias, and something complicated flashed across his features. Shame? Regret? It was hard to tell. Garrett stammered. "I don't—" "He's a monster!" someone shouted from the crowd of villagers that had gathered, the ones House Morthethane was protecting. "They're all monsters! They feed on us, take our children! We volunteered!" A young vampire stepped forward, Marcus, who'd been a farmer's son 2 years ago. "I walked up that mountain myself, knowing what waited. Lord Lucien gave me a choice, a real choice, and I made it. Because you were desperate," another villager yelled. "Because you had nothing left to lose." "Exactly," Victor said, his voice carrying across the square. "You see, Lucien? They come to you because they're desperate, because they have no other option. You call it choice, but it's just predation with extra steps. And deep down, they'll always hate us, always fear us." He yanked Garrett's head back. "Tell them, tell your monster what you really think." Garrett's mouth opened, closed. His eyes went to Tobias again, and this time the boy could read the expression clearly. Guilt, swimming in an ocean of fear. "I think," Garrett said slowly, his voice shaking, "that I am a coward and a fool." The square went quiet. "I think," Garrett continued, gaining strength, "that when my son was born broken, I saw it as a curse because I couldn't see past my own pride. I let the village turn him into a joke. I stood by while children threw stones at a 7-year-old boy." Tears began running down his face. "And when Lord Lucien, the monster everyone told me to fear, showed Tobias more kindness in one afternoon than I showed him in his whole life, I was relieved to be rid of the burden, the shame." Victor's expression twisted. "This is pathetic." "You asked for truth, so let me finish," Garrett interrupted, and there was steel in his voice now. "I've spent 3 months wondering if my son was still alive, wondering if the monster on the mountain was hurting him. But tonight, when your newborns attacked, when this village was burning and we were all going to die, it was House Morthethane that came to save us. It was Lord Lucian who fought to protect people who've never shown him anything but fear and suspicion. And there, behind their lines, I see my son, alive, healthy, protected. He looked directly at Lucian. My lord, I don't know if vampires are monsters or if humans are, or if we're all just broken in different ways. But I know that you've been a better father to my boy in 3 months than I was in 7 years. So whatever else you might be, you're not the monster here. I am. Victor stared at Garrett like he'd grown a second head. You're lying, saying what you think he wants to hear. I'm saying what I should have said months ago. Garrett pulled free of Victor's grip. The vampire was so shocked he let him, and walked across the square. He knelt before Tobias, who stood frozen, not sure what was happening. Son, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I'm sorry. For everything. For every stone I didn't stop. For every cruel word I didn't defend you from. For being too weak and too stupid to see that you were never the problem. I was. Tobias felt tears welling up. He'd imagined this moment 100 times. His father apologizing, his father seeing him. But now that it was happening, he didn't know what to say. I forgive you, he finally whispered, because Lucian had taught him that holding on to anger was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. But I'm not coming back. I know. Garrett smiled sadly. You found something better, something I could never give you. Just be happy, Tobias. Be everything I was too afraid to let you be. He stood, backed away, and rejoined the other villagers. Victor looked like he might explode. His entire dramatic demonstration had backfired spectacularly. This proves nothing, he snarled. One sentimental father doesn't change. It changes everything, Lucian said quietly, stepping forward. The blood on his face had already healed, and his eyes blazed with conviction. Because it proves what I've always believed, Victor, that people can change, that monsters can choose to be heroes, and cowards can find courage, that nothing is set in stone except what we accept to be true. Pretty words from a creature who drains humans dry. I've never killed to feed, not once in 3 centuries. Lucian's voice rang with absolute certainty. Every donor volunteers and survives. Every vampire I create chooses it freely. Every member of my house knows they can leave whenever they wish. He gestured at the vampires around them, at House Morthethane standing united. This is what honor looks like, Victor. This is what we can be when we choose civilization over savagery. Civilization? Victor spat the word. We're vampires. We're supposed to be apex predators, not lapdogs begging for scraps of human approval. Then you've already lost, Morgana interjected, stepping forward to stand beside her brother. Because power without purpose is just destruction, Victor. You have 60 newborns who know nothing but hunger. We have a house united by something you've never understood. Loyalty earned, not demanded. As if to prove her point, several of Victor's newborns had stopped fighting entirely, watching the confrontation with confusion and growing doubt. One of them, a young woman barely 20, looked at the organized discipline of House Morthethane, then at the chaos of her own allies, and made a decision. She dropped her weapon and raised her hands. I want to change sides. Traitor! Victor roared. No, the young vampire said. I want what they have. Control. Purpose. I didn't choose this. You turned me after slaughtering my family. But maybe I can choose what comes next. So do I, another newborn said, stepping forward. And I. Me too. Within moments, nearly half of Victor's army had defected, leaving their weapons on the ground and moving toward House Morthetane's lines. The vampires of Morthetaine didn't attack them. Instead, they welcomed them, disarmed them peacefully, and offered them guidance. Victor stared at the desertion, his face contorting with rage and disbelief. "You're all fools! Weak, pathetic fools who don't deserve immortality!" "Maybe," Lucian said. "Or maybe we're the only ones who understand what immortality is actually for." He drew a sword from one of his fallen allies, a beautiful blade etched with silver runes. "Last chance, Victor. Stand down. Accept judgment from the Vampire Council for your crimes. Your army is gone. Your point is disproven. It's over." "It's not over until you're dead!" Victor screamed and lunged. What happened next was brutal and decisive. Lucian had been holding back before, trying to subdue rather than kill. But now, with his people safe, with the villagers protected, with Tobias watching and learning what justice looked like, now he stopped pulling his punches. The duel lasted exactly 47 seconds. Tobias counted. It ended with Victor on his knees, Lucian's sword at his throat, and the entire square watching in absolute silence. "I should kill you," Lucian said softly, "for the innocents you've murdered, for the chaos you've spread, for trying to destroy everything I've built." "Then do it," Victor sneered. "Prove you're still a monster after all." Lucian met his brother's eyes, and something infinitely sad passed over his face. "No, because that's what you want. You want to prove we're all the same, all slaves to our hunger. But I'm not going to give you that satisfaction." He lowered the sword. "The Vampire Council will judge you. They'll lock you away where you can't hurt anyone else. And maybe, in a few centuries of isolation, you'll finally understand what you could have been." He nodded, and several of his vampires moved forward with silver chains, the only restraint that could hold one of their kind. They bound Victor carefully, professionally, showing more mercy than he'd ever shown anyone. As they led him away, Victor looked back at Lucian one last time. "You think you've won, but you're still a vampire, brother. Still cursed. And one day, that boy you've adopted will grow old and die, and you'll be alone again, and then you'll remember I was right." "Perhaps," Lucian replied, "but I'll have decades of watching him grow, learn, and become something extraordinary, and that will be worth any grief that follows. Because that's what love means, Victor, knowing it will hurt and choosing it anyway." Victor had no response to that. They took him away into the night, toward whatever judgment awaited him. The square slowly emptied as House Morthane helped put out fires, tend to wounded, and begin the long process of rebuilding. The villagers watched, some grateful, some still afraid, all of them reconsidering everything they'd believed about the Lord of the Mountain. Tobias found himself standing alone in the square where this had all begun, where Lucian had caught a stone meant for his face and changed everything. Lucian approached, exhausted and blood-stained, but alive. He crouched down to Tobias's level, just like he had that first day. "Are you all right?" the vampire asked. "I think so," Tobias replied. "My father apologized." "I heard. How do you feel about that?" "I don't know yet." The boy was quiet for a moment. "Is it true, what Victor said about me growing old and dying while you stay the same?" "Yes," Lucian said honestly. "That's the curse of immortality, Tobias. I'll watch you age. I'll watch you die. It will break something in me that might never heal." "Then why did you save me? Why bring me home and teach me and protect me if it's just going to hurt? Lucian smiled, a real smile, soft and genuine. Because the alternative is to feel nothing, to protect myself from pain by never caring about anything. And that's not living, Tobias. That's just existence. Victor chose existence. I'm choosing life, even if it comes with grief. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. You've given me purpose again, hope, a reason to keep trying to be better. That's worth any pain that comes later. Tobias threw his arms around the vampire's neck, and Lucian held him carefully, mindful of his fragile human bones and the vast strength in his own hands. "Thank you," Tobias whispered, "for catching the stone, for everything." "Thank you," Lucian replied, "for reminding me why I bother." 5 years passed. Tobias grew from a small, frightened boy into a thoughtful young man of 12. His leg never straightened, but Lucian commissioned better braces from the finest craftsmen in the supernatural world, and Morgana's enchantments made movement easier. He walked with a cane carved from ironwood and inlaid with silver, a gift for his 10th birthday. And if he couldn't run, he could certainly think circles around most people he encountered. He'd become something of a diplomat for House Morthethane, the human face for a vampire house trying to build bridges with mortal communities. The villagers of Greyhollow had slowly warmed to the keep on the mountain, especially after Lucian had rebuilt everything Victor's attack had destroyed and not demanded any extra tribute in return. On a spring morning that smelled of apple blossoms and new grass, Tobias sat in the library working through a treatise on supernatural law. At 12, he could read 4 languages, calculate complex mathematical formulas, and debate philosophy with scholars 3 times his age. Lucian said he would make an excellent lawyer or counselor someday. Morgana swept into the library, elegant as always in a gown of deep green. "There you are. Lucian's looking for you. Something about a visitor." Tobias marked his place in the book and followed her to the main hall, where Lucian stood talking to a woman Tobias had never seen before. She was human, middle-aged, with kind eyes and travel-worn clothes. "Ah, Tobias," Lucian gestured him forward. "This is Margaret Fairweather. She runs an academy for gifted children about 50 miles south. She's heard about your remarkable education and has come to make an offer." Margaret smiled warmly. "Lord Morthane has told me about your achievements, young man. I run a school for children with exceptional minds, children who need more challenge than ordinary education provides. I'd like to offer you a place among our students." Tobias looked at Lucian, surprised. "You want me to leave?" "I want you to have choices," Lucian corrected gently. "You've learned everything I can teach you here. Margaret's Academy could give you friends your own age, education from diverse teachers, and experience with the world beyond this mountain." He knelt down to eye level, the way he always did for important conversations. "But only if you want it. You always have a home here, Tobias, always." The boy thought about it. 5 years ago, he'd been a terrified child with nowhere to belong. Now he was being offered opportunities he'd never dreamed of. He looked around the library that had become his sanctuary, at Morgana, who'd taught him to play a dozen strategic games, at Lucian, who'd given him everything. "Could I come back?" he asked, "on holidays and summers?" "Try keeping him away," Morgana said with a smile. "Then I'd like to go," Tobias decided, "to learn and see new things. But this will always be home." Lucian pulled him into a hug, and Tobias felt the vampire's chest hitch with an emotion he didn't need to breathe to express. "You've grown into someone extraordinary," Lucian whispered. "I'm so proud of you." "I'm proud of you too," Tobias replied. "You've shown me that monsters are just people who've forgotten they have a choice, and you never forgot." 20 years after that,
Tobias returned to Morthane Keep as a man of 32, a renowned scholar and diplomatic liaison between human and supernatural communities. He still walked with a cane, his leg no better but no worse, and his hair had started showing silver at the temples. Lucian looked exactly the same, of course.
Unchanged by time, still standing watch over Grey Hollow and the surrounding lands, still trying to prove that vampires could be more than the sum of their hungers. They sat in the observatory, like they had so many times before, looking at stars that Lucian had watched for centuries and Tobias would only know for decades. "Do you ever regret it?" Tobias asked. "Saving me that day?" "Never." Lucian's answer was immediate. "You've changed everything, Tobias, not just for me, but for this entire region. The treaties you've negotiated, the schools you've helped establish, the understanding you've built between humans and supernatural beings, that's your legacy." "It started because you caught a stone," Tobias pointed out. "It started because you had the courage to stand in front of a vampire lord and cry," Lucian corrected. "You could have hidden. You could have accepted what the village said about you. But instead, you demanded to be seen, to be valued. And I'm a better person, whatever I am, because I saw you." Tobias was quiet for a moment. "I have something to tell you. Something you're not going to like." Lucian tensed. "What is it?" "I'm dying." The words were simple, matter of fact. "There's something wrong with my heart. The doctors give me maybe 5 years, probably less." The silence that followed was heavy with centuries of accumulated grief. "No," Lucian finally said. "There are ways. I could turn you. You could." "I don't want that." Tobias's voice was gentle but firm. "I've lived a good life, Lucian, a happy life, because of you. But it's a human life, and I want it to end as a human life should, with dignity, with my choices intact. You're asking me to watch you die? I'm asking you to live while I do." Tobias reached out and took the vampire's cold hand in his warm one. "Victor was wrong. You were never a monster. You are, the best father I could have asked for. And when I'm gone, you'll grieve, yes, but then you'll keep going, keep saving broken children. Keep proving that honor matters more than hunger. Keep being Lucian Morthethane, the vampire who chose to be more than his curse." Lucian's eyes shimmered with blood-red tears, the only kind vampires could cry. "I don't know if I can." "You can. You will. Because that's who you are." Tobias smiled. "And years from now, when you save some other frightened child, you'll remember me. And I'll still be with you, in a way. In every choice you make to be kind instead of cruel, to be gentle instead of violent, to catch the stone instead of letting it hit." They sat together in the observatory, the immortal and the dying, watching stars that would outlast them both. And in that moment, neither one was a monster. They were just family, chosen, treasured, and impossible to replace. When Tobias died 4 years later, peacefully in his sleep with Lucian and Morgana beside him, the entire supernatural community mourned. The human scholar who had built bridges between worlds was laid to rest in the garden of Morthethane Keep, under an apple tree that bloomed year-round through Morgana's magic. Lucian stood at the grave for 3 days and 3 nights without moving, grieving in the way only immortals can grieve, with the knowledge that the pain would never truly fade, because time meant nothing to him. But on the 4th day, he walked back into Grey Hollow, and when he saw a young girl being mocked for her stutter, for the way words tangled in her mouth and made the other children laugh, he stepped forward. "Why are they laughing at you?" he asked gently. The girl looked up at the vampire lord with wide, frightened eyes. "Because I'm broken, my lord." Lucian knelt down to her level. a gesture he'd learned from a boy with a twisted leg and an unbreakable spirit, and smiled. "Then let me tell you something about broken things," he said. "They're often the most beautiful." And he extended his hand. The girl, after a moment of hesitation, took it. Behind him, Lucian could have sworn he heard Tobias's voice on the wind. "See? I told you that you could." And the vampire king, who had lived for 3 centuries and would live for 3,000 more, finally understood the greatest truth of all. Love never truly dies. It just changes form, passing from one broken soul to another, lighting the darkness one caught stone at a time.